Hello everyone and Happy New Year. This is my first video back for the Primary Market Education series in 2025. My name is Sabrina Fox. I am founder of Fox Legal Training, and I am on a mission along with my team to educate the leverage finance market on documentation in their deals. And today we are going to go through the Wagamama offering memorandum. It's a deal that's currently in the market. It's a high yield bond. I'm going to share my screen so we can look at some of the reflections that I have made so far together. So first of all, just to recap, the Primary Market Education series is designed to assist market participants in understanding the best way to review deals quickly. So when you're in the primary market, it's an opportunity to hone your skills at looking for what really matters. So I call it a red flag review because I'm looking for things that really stand out to me as being particularly flexible for the borrower, and so the other side of that coin obviously being potentially risky for the lender. And my belief is that lenders deals eyes wide open and have the opportunity to do that, and that is what this session is all about. So in terms of first steps, I always start with capital structure and credit support analysis. So what that means is, where do you sit in the capital structure? These are senior secured notes. What does that actually mean in the context of this deal? We're going to look at the summary corporate and financing structure to answer this question, where we see the very, very teeny tiny writing, they kill me, that we've got 330 million notes, and then we've got a 55 million, a super senior revolving credit facility. So what that's telling me on day one is that this is a pretty simple capital structure. You've got some super senior capacity on day one, in terms, super senior debt outstanding on day one, potentially more capacity in the debt covenant itself. So I would want to look at the credit facilities basket for that to see how much more super senior debt could potentially be put in the future. The purpose of the capital structure and credit support analysis is to set a point A for when you're looking at the covenants, so you can see what could potentially happen to your point A. And point A comes in two parts. One is, is like debt and liens, so capital structure and credit support. And the second is value in the group. So what is in the box on day one? Because then you look at how the restricted payments and asset sales covenants could potentially change that picture over time. So looking at this, like I said, pretty simple capital structure. These boxes, the dark gray are the guarantors and the white is for non-guarantors. So I want to see guarantor coverage straight away, just see how much we're dealing with. And going now to the description of notes, you can find this number, by the way, in lots of different places. It's probably in a footnote to that chart where we were, but I go straight to the description of notes because lots of the other things that I need are in there as well. So I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. So this guarantor coverage is very high. It's in the upper 90s. What does that tell me? We probably don't need to think too much about what it's called structural subordination, which is when non-guarantor subsidiaries incur debt and therefore create a debt claim in favor of a third-party lender. That subordinates the notes, so then that third-party lender would get repaid before the notes. Whenever we're looking at a deal like this, we always want to check for all the different types of subordination, and those are structural, which I just discussed, effective, which is found in the permitted liens definition, but arises whenever an asset is secured in favor of another lender, which is not you if you're a lender. And then the last one is contractual subordination, which is that super senior RCF is a good example of that. Now, there's also temporal subordination, which arises when one tranche of debt matures ahead of another tranche of debt. So by virtue of the passage of time, it will get paid first, which means the later maturing debt is subordinated. So that's just kind of a review of all the different types of subordination. Here we've got some high guarantor coverage. I'm not as worried about structural subordination. I'm going to look now at the collateral. So I'm looking here at the security, the collateral section. And what I'm finding is it's mostly soft security. So intercompany loans, share pledges, receivables, that kind of thing, with some all asset English law floating charge granted by the parent guarantor and by Wagamama Limited. So the question then becomes, what do these entities actually own? I'm doubtful the parent guarantor owns much more than the shares of its subsidiary. Wagamama Limited maybe, owns some hard assets. The floating charge is over everything owned by that entity. So it can be valuable if the entity owns hard security, hard assets. So that's collateral on day one. I also wanted to point out in the agreed security principle summary that any perfection of security will also only be required by entities in the guarantor jurisdictions. I always recommend you chase down defined terms like this. In this case, it means England, Wales, Scotland, and Jersey. I'm not sure that this company has operations in many other places, but that's where your role, if you're analyzing this as a credit analyst, becomes really important, because you will know that for sure. I've focused on these legal aspects, but you'll know if there are other important entities in non-guarantor jurisdictions who therefore would not be required to perfect security in favor of these notes. We have some contractual subordination disclosure, which I mentioned before. This is the super senior RCF. We saw that on the structure chart. So now we've kind of pulled together and looked at our capital structure and credit support through the guarantees and the collateral. Point A has been more or less established. You really want to think about, with collateral and the assets in general, you're breaking down the company's assets into 3 buckets. 1, your collateral. 2, assets pledged to other lenders, so third-party lenders on day one. And 3 are the unencumbered assets. Unencumbered assets are the assets that the borrower will look to if they need to incur, for example, priming debt. Whenever we look at these deals these days, just because of the state of the market and the state of covenant flexibility, we're always looking forward to potential liability management. And it is not just lenders who are doing that. Borrowers and their sponsors are doing that too. It's very clear in the covenants that this is not just flexibility for this borrower to run its business. This is flexibility that will not only allow the borrower to run the business quite generously, would also allow them to pay dividends to the sponsor, and will allow them to invest significant amounts into unrestricted subsidiaries and incur priming debt, etc., etc. Those sorts of things will facilitate potential rejigging of the capital structure down the line, which is not how this sort of acquisition finance debt basket, debt, it's a kind of like covenant package was originally envisaged. You were giving, I call it the baby lawyer days, you were giving the borrower flexibility to run the business. This covenant package does go further than that. So it's something which is worth bearing in mind when you're looking at these. We are in a new world now where it really is important to look ahead. What would a liability management transaction look like for this borrower? Even though this is in the primary market, it's just something very important to think about on day one now. So the next thing I would do after that is go and look at redemption. Redemption is important because it's, it does affect very directly your return on your investment. So checking what that could mean to you is important. We have an equity clause, which will allow the borrower to redeem up to 40% with the proceeds of equity offerings, or potentially also net cash proceeds of equity offerings. We're checking equity offerings definition could show that it may also mean an offering of debt securities. We will look at that in just one second with a little Control F trick. But then also leaving 50% outstanding. Now you might look at that and say, well, 40% plus 50% is 90%. What happened to the other 10%? So this configuration of numbers is telegraphing to you that the other 10% could have been taken out as part of this 10% at 103 optional redemption provision. So whenever you see an equity clause that's split 40-50 and not 40-60, which is 100, even the lawyer can do maths, that simple, then that means that there will be a 10% at 103, or that there was one and maybe it got taken out during pre-marketing. And this one also gives the borrower the flexibility to use this in a blended make-whole scenario. So if there were an LBO in the future and the borrower could not use the specified change of control event or portability provision, which is present in this deal, they could instead use the equity clause, and on the day of that, arrangement, could redeem with the equity claw and also use the make whole together. So it's cheaper than the make whole because you're using the equity claw to take out all the bonds. And that's what this all notes redeemed substantially concurrently gives them the flexibility to do. I've already gone through the 10% of 103, and so now we've looked at redemption. That's that done. Next, I go to debt. In the debt covenant, you're looking at a consolidated senior secured debt ratio of 4.1 times, also fixed charge coverage ratio of 2 times, and then a total debt ratio of 4.6 times. You can run your numbers off the back of that, recognizing that this will be subject to the calculation flexibility that is set out in the financial calculations covenant, which, among other things, will permit significant add backs based on EBITDA transactions, including purchases, sales, and group initiatives. So something just to keep in mind, that this 4.1 might not be the 4.1 that you would calculate if you were using your EBITDA numbers. I did promise to look up equity offering, so let's just do that really quickly. Equity offering means, and then we're going to come back to PDF 209. So equity offering means any public or private sale of common capital stock or preferred stock, public offerings, issuances to any subsidiary, and a public or private sale. So this does refer to common stock or preferred stock and does not include debt securities, which is actually great because it's then a tighter formulation than some of these definitions that I have seen in the past, which would include debt securities. Even though it's called an equity offering, it actually also permits the borrower to use like an issuance of high yield bonds. But this doesn't do that. So I'm actually happy to see that. So back to the debt covenant, we've got the ratio debt basket, and then I've highlighted all the key permitted debt baskets. I'm not going to go through every single one of them. For Fox Legal Training students, this OM will be posted up on the Primary Market Education Series course. That course is actually free for the buy side, so anyone on the buy side can enroll in that course and get the benefit of these walkthroughs on various deals, which I've been doing for the last 6 months or so. What I will say is that for each permitted debt basket, lenders should pull out 3 pieces of information. The first piece of information is very simple. It's the clause number. So this one's clause A. You want to make a note of that, clause A, because when you look at the definitions of permitted collateral liens and permitted liens, you want to make a note of clause A because it will cross-refer back to the debt covenant. If you don't have a note of what the cross-reference letters mean, you're going to be constantly switching back and forth, and that takes time. So one of the 3 pieces of information is the clause number. The next piece of information is the amount of the basket itself. And the final piece of information, is it available to non-guarantors? So this one is incurrence by the parent guarantor or its restricted subsidiaries, which means yes, it is available to non-guarantors. Now, notwithstanding the fact that all of these baskets are available to non-guarantors, there is also a separate basket specifically for incurrence by non-guarantors. Now, I personally have never really understood the sense behind this. It's just here, clause DD, but it is what it is. It's just something that I like to point out. The only other thing I'll point out about the debt covenant is this reference to contribution indebtedness. Now, what I say in my note here is read the defined term. I went and read the defined term, and so I updated my note to say that this does actually include available restricted payments capacity. So the traditional concept, contribution indebtedness, was a 1-for-1 contribution of capital equity by the sponsor or, any kind of injection of, the fair market value of assets, for example. But there would have to be a contribution into the group. So that's like value coming into the group. And then the borrower could borrow against that value, usually 1-to-1, but sometimes 2-to-1, so 2 units of debt per unit of capital contribution. But what it's now morphed into is contribution indebtedness is a kind of combination of that traditional concept and the available RP amounts debt basket. For those of you who've taken the course, you will know that means specific reference to restricted payments capacity and the ability to incur debt based on restricted payments. again, I don't want to get into a rant, which I do sometimes do, about whether or not it makes sense to incur debt against restricted payments capacity. So let's just put that to one side for now. I want to get into some other things. So one other aspect here I wanted to point out, let's see, so in terms of permitted liens and permitted collateral liens, there is a fair amount of permitted collateral liens capacity, including in favor of this contribution indebtedness basket. So just remembering that means dilution of your collateral. That is the risk of a permitted collateral lien, dilution of your collateral. But in addition to that, the general debt basket is also on that list, in addition to some of these other baskets, the joint venture basket, letter of credit facility basket, the credit facility itself, capitalized lease purchase money obligations basket. So a fair amount of dilution risk. Permitted liens, we've got the general debt basket, which I personally think is marginally kind of on the flexible end of flexible, if I could put it that way. And then also CLO purchase money, which we would expect to see, and credit facilities basket. And then GG here also is on there, but that's also letter of credit. So we'd kind of expect to see that. So that's your effective subordination risk, the priming risk that's present by virtue of the fact that the borrower can secure assets in favor of other lenders that do not secure the notes. The one other thing I just want to point out about the permitted liens basket was there is a general permitted lien basket, which is, let's just remember it being potentially on the high side, well, 40 million and 50% of LTM EBITDA. So that is on top of the capacity that I already went over. So moving on now to the restricted payments covenant. So the restricted payments covenant protects value, keeps value in the box, if you will. And it will be a combination of a builder amount and a series of baskets, permitted payment baskets, and then also permitted investments baskets, which is in the defined terms, so you have to go and read it. But what I noticed here is that this is the definition of what a restricted payment is, and then there is the formulation of the builder basket here, and there's these two conditions which you must comply with or fulfill if you are able to use in order to access capacity in the builder basket. And neither one of these conditions applies for investments. So any investment in an unrestricted subsidiary using capacity from the builder basket will not be required to pass the material event of default or fixed charge coverage ratio condition. Do with that what you will. Okay. The next one here is this 50% of CNI in the baby lawyer days, I will just say, would typically be reduced by 100% of losses, because this is the builder basket. It builds and grows with the borrower. It reduces from losses. 50% of profits, 100% of losses deducted, ideally. But what we've seen recently and what is in this deal is for any quarter where there is loss, the borrower makes losses, no reduction will be made of the builder basket. So it will be deemed to be zero, the amount. So it's zero, no losses. So this is builder basket that only goes up, it never goes down. I just don't think it makes sense in the context of a package which is meant to grow, expand, and contract with the borrower. So I wanted to point that out. I have noted each of the significant or material restricted payments baskets. Just a couple of things to point out is that we have a leverage-based basket in connection with a specified change of control event, which is portability, which is capped at 3.6 times. And then there is also a permitted investment in connection with a specified change of control event, but that one is uncapped. There's also leverage-based measures that are related to just straight leverage at 3.35 times, but then also exceeding that, the borrower can still make restricted payments using an available amount concept, which is kind of a loans concept, is defined in a way you would expect to see in a loan, has been ported here into a high yield bond. Also something that we see fairly frequently now. And then in the permitted investments definition, I just wanted to highlight the use of a no worse permitted investments basket. So here we have, let's see, just gonna find that for you. Okay, yes, so clause 30 has a consolidated total debt ratio of 3.6 times or not greater, so the no worse. Same with fixed charge coverage ratio, 2 times or no worse. So this means that even if the borrower is above these measures, they can still make permitted investments so long as pro forma for the investment, these measures would not be worse. Finally, just want to note there is a J-Crew blocker in this deal, which is, it's great, except it only applies to material IP, but it's obviously lender accretive. It's good for lenders that it is there. Just think about what other assets the borrower might own that are not IP that it could drop down into an unrestricted subsidiary for purposes of liability management. So I will stop there. I will thank you for your attention. I hope that this has been helpful. If you have any questions about the deal or you would like to take a look at Fox Legal Training's first of its kind online covenant education training platform, which does provide a hybrid of in-person and online covenant training sessions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. I am available at Sabrina@foxlegaltraining.com. Have a great day, everyone, and I will see you at the next one.